Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going way back to the birth of a nation, India, fresh out of colonial rule, stepping onto the world stage. So whether you're a UPSC aspirant, gearing up for the GS1, that's India's post-independence foreign policy chapter, or just a history enthusiast, this deep dive is for you. And hey, while you're at it, why not hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our future deep dives.
It's a fascinating period, really. Imagine a world still reeling from World War II, with the old order crumbling, and a new one struggling to take shape. India, at this critical juncture, had to make choices that would shape its destiny.
Talk about pressure. It's like being handed a blank canvas and told to paint the future of a nation. So who are the key players in this grand endeavor? I'm guessing Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, takes center stage.
Absolutely. Nehru was more than just a leader. He was the architect of India's early foreign policy. His vision was deeply rooted in certain core principles: safeguarding India's hard-won independence, advocating for peaceful coexistence, and most interestingly, charting a course through the Cold War without picking sides.
That last one sounds like a tightrope walk.
Yeah.
Especially with the U.S. and the Soviet Union vying for global dominance. It's like trying to stay neutral at a family dinner where everyone's arguing about politics. How did India manage to pull that off?
That's where Penshil comes in. Those 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, UPSC aspirants, take note, mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty, non-aggression, non-interference in internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. These weren't just lofty ideals, they formed the basis of India's interactions on the world stage.
Wow, it's amazing how these principles from decades ago still resonate with India's foreign policy today. Speaks volumes about their enduring relevance. But I'm curious, were there moments when these principles were truly put to the test?
Oh, there were plenty. Take the Korean War in 1950. North Korea invades South Korea, and the world divides into camps. India condemns the aggression, but also opposes outside intervention. It was a delicate balancing act, trying to uphold principles without being drawn into the Cold War tug-of-war.
That takes some serious diplomatic maneuvering. It's easy to get swept up in the heat of the moment. But India chose to stick to its principles, even when it meant facing criticism from both sides. Did this approach work out in India's favor?
Well, it certainly earned India respect on the global stage. It showed that India was a nation that stood by its convictions, even when it was difficult, but it also had its critics. Some argued that India's non-alignment was too idealistic, that it prevented India from taking a more active role in shaping global events.
It sounds like a constant juggling act, staying true to your principles, while also navigating the complexities of real politics. Were there other instances where India had to make tough calls?
Absolutely. The Suez Canal crisis in 1956 was another defining moment. India strongly condemned the Anglo-French attack on Egypt. Again, the focus was on upholding the principle of national sovereignty and opposing any form of colonialism, resonating with India's own history.
A firm stance against colonialism. Makes sense. But weren't there times when things got a little murky, where upholding those principles maybe clash with other considerations?
The Hungarian uprising in 1956 is a perfect example. The Soviet Union brutally suppressed the uprising, and while many nations condemned the action, India abstained from doing so. This drew criticism from the West and highlighted the tightrope walk India had to perform during the Cold War.
That must have been a difficult decision. It seems like every situation presented its own unique challenges, but it also demonstrates a commitment to carving out an independent path. Did India ever actively participate in resolving international conflicts, though?
Definitely. The Congo crisis from 1960 to 1964 showcases India's dedication to peacekeeping. India contributed troops to the UN mission, working to restore order in the newly independent nation. It was a testament to India's commitment to peaceful conflict resolution and a practical application of those Panchsheel principles.
So far, we've seen India on the world stage, navigating global politics with a finesse that even seasoned diplomats would envy. But let's shift focus a bit. What about India's relationships with its neighbors? Those must have come with their own set of complexities.
Oh, absolutely. For any nation, relationships with neighbors are crucial. And for India, they've been a mix of cooperation, conflict, and everything in between. Let's start with the one that's always in the news, India and Pakistan.
Yes. The elephant in the room, or should I say the tiger on the subcontinent. It's a relationship marked by a shared history, partition, And the ever-present Kashmir conflict.
Exactly. The partition itself was a traumatic event, and the conflict over Kashmir further exacerbated tensions. Pakistan's invasion of Kashmir in 1947 led to a war, and although the UN intervened, a permanent solution has remained elusive. UPSC aspirants, make a note. The Kashmir conflict is a major focus area in foreign policy studies.
It's a conflict that's cast a long shadow over both nations. But amidst all the tension, were there any instances of cooperation?
There were glimmers of hope. The Indus Water Treaty, signed in 1960, is a prime example. It's a testament to the possibility of cooperation, even amid deep mistrust. By effectively allocating water resources, they averted a potential water war, which is quite a feat considering the circumstances.
That's an impressive achievement, especially given the historical baggage. But sadly, I know the positives were often overshadowed by negatives.
Unfortunately, yes. From the 1980s onward, Pakistan's shift towards state-sponsored terrorism became a major challenge for India. It added a dangerous layer to an already strained relationship, making diplomacy and conflict resolution even more difficult.
It's a sobering reminder of the complexities that India faced and continues to face in its immediate neighborhood, from one complex neighbor to another. Let's talk about China. I believe things started on a rather optimistic note, didn't they?
They did. The early 1950s were a time of hope. The Hindi Chini bye-bye, Indians and Chinese are brothers. Sentiment was popular. The Panchsheel Agreement was signed. Both nations pledged peaceful coexistence and mutual respect. It seemed like the foundation for a strong partnership had been laid.
But that brotherly bond didn't last long, did it?
Sadly, no. The border dispute simmering beneath the surface erupted in 1962 when China launched a surprise attack on India. It was a devastating blow, shattering the illusion of friendship and leaving behind a legacy of mistrust. This war had a profound impact on India's strategic thinking and its perception of China.
That 1962 war must have been a real wake-up call for India. Did this lead to any soul-searching about whether signing the Panchsheel Agreement had been a mistake?
Absolutely. Many analysts believe that India's trust in China, as embodied in the Panchsheel Agreement, led to a lapse in military preparedness, leaving India vulnerable to the attack. It sparked a debate about the balance between idealism and realism in foreign policy, a debate that continues even today.
A harsh lesson, but a crucial one for any nation navigating the global arena. So we've covered two of India's most prominent neighbors, both with their own unique challenges. Let's move on to Sri Lanka, a smaller neighbor, but with a set of complexities. That deeply impacted India's foreign policy, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka between the Sinhalese majority and the Tamil minority played a significant role in shaping India's relationship with the island nation. The presence of a large Tamil population in India added another layer of sensitivity to the situation.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act for India, maintaining good relations with Sri Lanka, while also being sensitive to the plight of the Tamils. How did India approach this?
India's approach was a mix of diplomacy, humanitarian aid, and ultimately military intervention. In the 1980s, India attempted to mediate between the Sri Lankan government and the Tamil Tigers, a separatist group fighting for an independent Tamil homeland.
I can imagine these mediation efforts were incredibly complex, especially with such high stakes involved. Did they ultimately prove successful?
Unfortunately, no. The situation continued to deteriorate, and India eventually deployed a peacekeeping force, the IPKF, to Sri Lanka in 1987. The mission was to disarm the Tamil Tigers and enforce a peace accord. It was a controversial decision, with some arguing that India was overstepping its bounds, while others believed it was necessary to prevent further bloodshed.
What a difficult situation, trying to play peacemaker in a conflict. With such deep-rooted ethnic tensions, did the IPKF manage to achieve its objectives?
The IPKF's mission in Sri Lanka was fraught with challenges. They faced fierce resistance from the Tamil Tigers, and the conflict took a heavy toll on both sides. The IPKF was eventually withdrawn in 1990, without achieving a lasting peace.
This deep dive is certainly revealing the intricate web of challenges India faced in those early years, from navigating the Cold War to managing complex relationships with neighbors. It's a lot to absorb. It's like watching a masterclass in diplomacy, with all its successes and setbacks laid bare.
Indeed. And we haven't even touched upon India's nuclear journey yet. That's a whole other chapter, filled with difficult decisions and far-reaching consequences.
You're absolutely right. That's a topic that deserves its own dedicated deep dive. But before we jump into that, let's take a quick break and give our listeners a chance to digest everything we've covered so far.
All right. Let's shift gears a bit and delve into India's nuclear journey. It's a story that takes us back to the early days of independence, even before those pivotal global events we just discussed.
It's interesting to think about this in the context of Nehru's vision. We've talked about his commitment to peace and non-alignment. So how does a nuclear program fit into that picture?
It's crucial to remember that Nehru's vision, it wasn't solely about avoiding conflict. It was also about building a modern, technologically advanced India. He saw immense potential in atomic energy, not for weapons, but for peaceful purposes, power generation, scientific research, things that would benefit the nation.
So harnessing the atom for good, not destruction.
That aligns with his overall philosophy. But I know India did eventually conduct nuclear tests. When did that shift happen?
The first test, codenamed Smiling Buddha, happened in 1974 under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. India maintained that it was a peaceful nuclear explosion, intended for scientific and technological advancements, not for military purposes.
Peaceful nuclear explosion. Those two words together seem a bit contradictory, don't they? I imagine the international community had some questions about that. What was the global reaction?
You're right. The international community wasn't entirely convinced. There were concerns that this test was a step toward weaponization. Despite India's insistence on its commitment to non-proliferation, it definitely raised eyebrows and fueled debates about India's true intentions. And this wasn't the only nuclear test India conducted right.
Correct. In 1998, under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, India carried out a series of 5 nuclear tests at Pokhran, known as Pokhran II. This time there was no ambiguity. India had declared itself a nuclear weapon state.
It must have been a defining moment, sending shockwaves through the international community. What prompted India to take such a significant step?
Well, there were several factors. The security environment in the region was becoming increasingly unstable, particularly with China's growing nuclear arsenal. Additionally, India felt that the existing global non-proliferation regime, specifically the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, was inherently discriminatory. It allowed certain countries to possess nuclear weapons, while preventing others from doing so.
So a mix of security concerns and a feeling of being unfairly excluded from the global nuclear order. How did the world react to Pokhran II?
As you can imagine, there was widespread condemnation, especially from the Western powers. The U.S. imposed sanctions, and many countries expressed fears of a potential nuclear arms race in South Asia. However, there was also some understanding from countries that acknowledged India's security concerns and its long-standing advocacy for disarmament.
It's fascinating how this one issue, nuclear weapons, brought to light so many different aspects of India's foreign policy, security concerns, the desire for strategic autonomy, and the inherent challenges of the global non-proliferation regime. What was the domestic response like? How did the Indian people view this development?
The reaction within India was mixed. Some celebrated it as a necessary step for national security and a symbol of India's rightful place on the world stage. Others expressed anxieties about the potential consequences, like an arms race, and the diversion of resources from other crucial areas, like development.
It's a decision that continues to be debated and analyzed even today. It's clear that becoming a nuclear power had profound implications for India's foreign policy. Did India continue developing its nuclear capabilities after Pokhran II?
Yes. India continued refining its nuclear arsenal and developing delivery systems. However, it also made it clear that these weapons were solely for deterrence and adopted a no-first-use policy, a crucial aspect of India's nuclear doctrine.
That no first-use policy is an important distinction. Essentially, it means India will only use nuclear weapons in retaliation to a nuclear attack, not as an offensive weapon. But alongside this, India has also been a strong advocate for global nuclear disarmament, right?
Absolutely. India has consistently pushed for global nuclear disarmament and actively participated in international forums and negotiations aimed at achieving this goal. It believes that eliminating nuclear weapons is the only way to guarantee long-term global security.
So even though India possesses nuclear weapons, it simultaneously advocates for their eventual elimination. That's a complex and nuanced stance.
It is, but one that aligns with India's historical stance on peace and disarmament.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. India's early foreign policy under Nehru, the complexities of its relationships with neighbors, the decision to become a nuclear power, and the ongoing efforts to promote global disarmament. It's fascinating to see how all these pieces fit together to form the larger puzzle of India's foreign policy journey.
You've done an excellent job of weaving these threads together. It's a journey that continues to unfold today. as India seeks to balance its national interests with global aspirations in a constantly changing world.
And that brings us to a crucial question. How will India continue navigating this complex world in the 21st century? What are the challenges and opportunities on the horizon?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? India's foreign policy is at a crossroads, with numerous factors at play: the rise of China, shifting global power dynamics, the evolving nature of terrorism, and the urgent issue of climate change. It requires careful strategic choices, balancing self-interest with the need for global cooperation.
It's clear that India's foreign policy is dynamic and constantly evolving. Our listeners, especially those preparing for the UPSC exams, should keep this in mind. But for now, let's leave our audience with a thought-provoking question to ponder. How can India utilize its growing economic and military might to become a more influential player on the world stage?
That's an excellent question to consider. India has the potential to be a leading voice for peace, development, and a more just global order, but realizing that potential will require careful planning, strategic thinking, and a commitment to its core values.
Well said. And as always, we encourage our listeners to continue exploring these themes. There's a wealth of information out there, and we'll be sure to share additional resources in the show notes. And before we go, don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this deep dive, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful explorations. Be sure to click that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future episodes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. It's incredible to think about how much we've covered, from Nehru's vision to the complexities of nuclear diplomacy. It's clear that India's foreign policy has been anything but static.
Yeah, it's been a dynamic journey, full of twists and turns. And what's particularly fascinating is how these events from decades ago continue to shape India's role in the world today.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they keep in mind as they delve deeper into this topic?
Well, for those UPSC aspirants out there, remember that understanding the historical context is crucial. These events, they aren't just isolated incidents, they're threads woven into the tapestry of India's foreign policy. Pay attention to the recurring themes, the challenges, the triumphs, and how India's approach has evolved over time.
It's like piecing together a puzzle, seeing how each event connects to the bigger picture. And speaking of the bigger picture, what about the future of India's foreign policy? What kind of trends should our listeners be paying attention to?
That's where things get really interesting. India's role on the global stage is constantly evolving. Its economic clout is growing, its military strength is increasing, and it's becoming more assertive in its foreign policy. The question is, how will India leverage these assets to shape the world order in the coming decades?
That's a question that'll keep analysts busy for years to come. It's clear that understanding India's post-independence foreign policy isn't just about memorizing dates and events. It's about grasping the underlying principles, the complexities, and the ongoing evolution of a nation finding its place in the world.
Precisely. And that's what makes this subject so captivating. It's a story that's still being written, with new chapters unfolding all the time.
And who knows, maybe some of our listeners will be the ones writing those chapters. Maybe they'll be the diplomats, the policymakers, the thought leaders shaping India's future on the global stage.
I wouldn't be surprised. There's a whole generation out there, eager to make their mark on the world. And who better to lead the way than those who understand the complexities of India's past and the potential of its future?
On that inspiring note, it's time for us to sign off. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into India's post-independence foreign policy. We hope you found it insightful, informative, and maybe even a little bit thought-provoking.
And remember, the world is waiting for your contributions. Go out there and make a difference.
And before we go, don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this deep dive, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful explorations. Be sure to click that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future episodes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.